I had a job once where I worked in an accounting department, and I was the only male there. There were several females that I worked with, and a few months into the work there, our manager, or actually our supervisor of our department, left and took another job. So immediately there was a lot of talk in our office among those of us who were left as who would become the new supervisor. And one by one, we all kind of got it in our heads that, hey, maybe I'd like to be the new supervisor. Each of us started kind of plotting. There were about 3 or 4 of us that on our own made appointments with the manager of our area in order to go in and meet with her and tell her what our great qualifications were and why each one of us should be the new supervisor. So one by one, as I said, 3 or 4 of us went in individually and met with the manager over our area, and she was very polite. She heard what each one of us had to say, and I don't know what the others had to say, but I talked about how I might make a good supervisor of the area and how she should consider me an applicant. Well, a few weeks went by, and there was a lot of tension in the office, and finally we heard her decision. She decided to go outside the company and hire a new supervisor. For me, this text in the Gospel of Mark this morning drove home that experience that I had in a way that was all too familiar. See, I can relate with James and John, these 2 disciples that wanted to get a little piece of the action. Now, they weren't sure what it would look like for Jesus to be in his glory, but Jesus had already been talking about his death and his coming resurrection. They weren't sure what that would look like, but they knew they wanted to be a part of whatever that was. They wanted to be at Jesus' left and Jesus' right hand in his glory. Again, their idea of power was this worldly idea of power, and they probably couldn't have imagined that Jesus would die on a cross in the way that he did. But nonetheless, James and John wanted this power, they wanted this glory with Jesus. And what's interesting is Jesus' response in the text. I would imagine Jesus, in his position, wouldn't have been out of line to have a complete smackdown right there and say, what are you guys talking about? This is a crazy idea. Who are you to ask me to do whatever it is that you want of me? But no, Jesus goes along. He goes along with their request. He says, oh, so tell me what it is that you want me to do. It's as if Jesus is humoring them. So they say, well, this is what we want. We want to be at your left and at your right hand. Jesus says, well, again, amazingly, Jesus is very respectable towards James and John, where he could completely tear them to shreds at this point. He says, well, that's a nice idea, he says. Can you drink the cup from which I drink? And they say, yeah, sure, I can do that. And then he says, will you be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized? And they're like, sure, yeah, that's cool. But then Jesus says, you may be able to do these, but it's not my place to decide who gets to sit at my right and left hand. It is for those for whom it has been chosen. So Jesus lets them down gently. But here we go with the other disciples. Of course, the rumor mill cranks up, and they hear that James and John have been going in and talking to the Master. So the other disciples get upset. Now, are they upset because they didn't think of this first? That they would go in and talk to Jesus first about this idea? Or are they really upset because these 2 disciples are trying to get ahead of them? But Jesus has an interesting response. He turns all of this upside down and he says, now look, why would any of you want these positions of power? For you know how worldly leaders how they are abusive with their power. Why would any of you want a piece of this action? This is just crazy. What Jesus is doing here is he's reframing the situation. He's helping the disciples see in a little bit wider way that what they're asking is not really what they want. He says, look at these tyrants who are your worldly leaders. You want to be like them? So it gives the disciples pause. It gives them a chance to think about what it is that they are asking. And I think that's what's really key here, is because what Jesus is doing in reframing the question is helping them see what's really best for them in the long run. They might want this, on some level, they might want this power, this worldly idea of power that they think they will get. But on another level, Jesus wants what's best for them. So he reminds them that he himself came to be a servant of all. He didn't come to rule over people. He came indeed to be a servant. And he instructs them to be the same. Because aren't we at our best when we are of service to others? Aren't we at our best when we show humility towards others as opposed to trying to lord it over them? Doesn't Jesus here want what's best for his disciples? By definition, I think what this text is telling us then for our lives here today is that God also wants what's best for us. God always wants what's best for us, I believe, and I believe God works to make that happen. Sometimes it's not what we want. It's not always what we envision for ourselves. But I do believe God always wants what's best for us. For me, that's the gospel message in this text today. That that's what God is working for in our lives.